My name's Keesha Peterson. I'm a technician on the William Kennedy. I work for the Center of Earth Observation Science at the University of Manitoba. So I'm mostly responsible for any of the scientific equipment that comes on board. So maintaining, cleaning, programming, any of the hardware or mechanical aspects of the equipment, as well as the deployments and the recoveries of the equipment. And then when the equipment is back on board, then I'll do most of the preliminary processing of the data. So basically taking out anomalies or in-air values, just some of the noisy data that doesn't really make sense for the purpose of like the scope of the project. Yeah, especially when things start to go wrong. If there's any issues with the equipment or something comes up, then I'll troubleshoot it and try to resolve it so that we can have kind of data that makes sense. So any like skewed data or weird numbers that the sensors are giving, then I'll troubleshoot them and kind of try to figure out the issue so that the scientists can have their data that actually makes sense for the environment that we're working in. Working in the field in the Arctic has been very challenging. We've had a lot of issues with the equipment when we were working this field season. A lot of like broken things, not having the right amount of kind of backup hardware, and just a lot of unforeseen obstacles kind of came up working in the Arctic. It's also a super rugged environment, so it makes it a bit more challenging just with the cold temperatures, cold water. It's very hard to maintain the equipment up here. Overall, I think that the trip was, for the most part, successful. We got a lot of good scientific work done at the stations in the southern part. It's a bit disappointing that we couldn't make it up to the northern part of Coral, or yeah. So, but otherwise, the storms made it a bit challenging as well. Like the weather just wasn't great, and so kind of having to deal with that as an obstacle made it a bit more interesting. As for the first year of the cruise, I think we learned a lot. I would say we had a lot of takeaways in terms of where our opportunities were scientifically as well as with the ship overall. I think this was a really good trial year and there were a lot of really great takeaways from it. It was really interesting. I was meeting a lot of the scientists for the very first time, so I was a bit nervous. I was also meeting my boss for the first time, so I was super nervous about that, but I feel like everybody gelled very well. There was a lot of really great communication between everyone, and everybody was super adaptable to kind of the given situations, the weather, the storms, the canceled operations, whatnot. I think it was great.
Talk a bit about the weather.
Well, we had a lot of storm days and canceled operations due to like high winds. Some days we would have 45 knot winds to 50 knot winds, which would basically cancel all operations. Very high swells, making it difficult to do deployments or recoveries, and making the environment not so safe to work in. So dealing with that has been interesting, but the storm days are good because it gives the scientists time to analyze some of the data that come in from the previous like stations, previous deployments. So the storm days were good and bad. Yeah, we for the most part the trip up was great. We probably had maybe 1 or 2 days of rough seas when we were going up the Labrador coast. We also had issues when we first left PEI with some of the gear on board, like the water maker and other issues that kind of came up. But other than that, the sail up was super calm. We saw lots of icebergs. It was really beautiful weather that we had. It was probably about when we got to Hudson Strait, closer to Coral Harbor, where we started experiencing less great weathers. But other than that, the sail up was smooth. Yeah, I guess having both Zodiacs get a hole in them, I think or having to deal with that was pretty interesting. Also I guess Well, no, I think that's it.
What seasickness is that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I guess that's also a super funny story. I'd never been seasick before this trip. Anytime I've been at sea, I've never experienced sickness, and um, being around 20 other people who are experiencing kind of the same symptoms, I didn't think I would get seasick, but we had a couple rough days of wind and I succumbed. Yeah, I'm very, very grateful to have the opportunity to work up here. I think that most people don't actually get the opportunity to visit the Canadian Arctic, and it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And to be lucky enough to work here is, I'm very fortunate to be given this opportunity. I've gotten to meet a lot of really amazing people, visit a lot of really amazing communities, and see how the lifestyle is different here. And I'm very grateful and humbled.